Monday. And so glad that you are choosing to join with us here today. Good to see you, Pam and Jean. I'm so glad that you all have decided to spend a little time here with me here today on Real Life Matters. Welcome each of you who are watching, wherever you are watching. I'd appreciate it if you would just put a note in our comments as to where your location is. I haven't asked you all to do that in a while, but it would be helpful for me to be able to see where our watchers are coming from. So again, I'm just so happy that you've chosen to spend some time here with us on Real Life Matters here today. For those of you who don't know, I'd like to start off by saying that Real Life Matters is we try to look at real life matters and come up with some real life solutions. That is our goal, is to come up with some real life solutions. Our belief is that the Bible speaks to every problem we have. We believe that every issue that we face can be traced back to one of three broken relationships. Your relationship with God, your relationship with others, and your relationship with yourself. And so we strive to try to find ways to address each of those issues and what we're dealing with. So again, thank you for watching. Shout out to Jim and to Beverly and to Shell. So all of those of you who are watching, I may not call everybody. Hey, what's up, Joe Willie, St. Victor? Good to see you, Christine from, so we got Highland, Indiana in the house right down the street. Kenya down in Florida. Hey there, Shaquana. I'm glad that you're choosing to join in. From Eric, I believe in Chicago Heights. And Beverly, Beverly, I'm not sure where you live at. I think you're in Chicago Heights, but I'm really not sure. Where else we got? Denver in the house. We got some folks all over the place. So again, we're just so happy that each of you are choosing to join with us here today. I'm going to ask that you would please consider sharing this video on your networks as we get started. Pray that you would consider sharing that if you think that something is going to be said. And if you want to wait until to see if I'm worthy of being shared, I would appreciate you sharing this video after we get done, just to try to get our listenership up. So let's go ahead and jump right in with tonight. And so what we have been looking at, this is part 3 of our talk on looking at real life matters, talking about moving our relationships from awful to awesome. And so what we've been looking at the last 3 weeks is how do we raise the bar on romance? A lot of us, not all of us are married. Some of us are married, but not everybody is married. And so those, but even before, while we're married, we still have, there should be some level of romance in our relationships. But as you think about it, if you're not married and you're in a dating relationship, and it's interesting as I think about the people I talk with now, I have to redefine terms very often because my term would be dating. But then when I talk to a lot of people now, there are so many other terms for relationships, situationships, and dating and talking to. And so whatever terminology you use for what I am putting under this general term that I'm calling romantic relationships, as we are looking at how do you deal with that? How do you come up and build really healthy relationships? And so a couple of weeks ago, just to kind of go back and kind of look where we have come from, we've been talking about 3 principles of building healthy romantic relationships. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about beware of TDTS. And that was not STDs, but it's beware of TDTS, which is going too deep too soon. Don't be so quick to rush into intimacy. And so we looked at that a couple of weeks ago. By the way, we've been looking at Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar, I like to call her Miss Go Too Far, as the model for looking at how you deal with these romantic relationships. And we looked at how how Mrs. Potiphar wanted to just jump right into the deep waters in terms of really giving her heart and her body to Joseph immediately. So we talked about the danger, beware of going too deep too soon. Last week we looked a little bit deeper into that because the scripture says that Joseph was well built and handsome, and Mrs. Potiphar saw him and decided that, she immediately asked him, come sleep with me, come to bed with me. And Joseph made a decision that he was not going to do that. And so we talked about within our romantic relationships, one of the things that you have to do is move beyond purely physical attraction. And we just talked about the danger of that when you are moving into this physical relationship immediately, this eros type of love too quick, too soon. You are in danger of attaching yourself, gluing yourself, connecting yourself with somebody that you are not supposed to be attached to. And that creates all kind of problems within our relationships. And so we looked at that. We talked about God's design for sex and how that was supposed to be within the context of marriage. And so tonight I want to move to the third and final principle of raising the bar on romance. And that is, we're going to be talking about the topic of building relationships on the foundation of respect. Building relationships on the foundation of respect. And so as we look at that, so we're going to jump into that. And again, I also just want to remind you that if you are watching on Facebook or on YouTube Live, if you go to either one of those pages, the Facebook page or the YouTube Live, I have a link on there that has you can download the handout for tonight, the study notes to allow you to kind of follow along with me. And then even if you miss something, you still have my notes from tonight. So we're going to be talking about this idea of building strong relationships on the foundation of respect. And so the scripture we're going to be looking at tonight that I'm taking my teaching from, again, is going back to Genesis chapter 39. We're going to be looking at verses 8 and 9. And it says, after Mrs. Potiphar saw Joseph and said that, come lie with me, he made this statement to her. He says, look, so Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. He says, except you. He says, he is not, no one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. And so we're going to be looking at those few statements here in our teaching here tonight in the time we have here together. So the first thing that I want to say to you, the first principle, as we're talking about this idea of building a relationship on the foundation of respect, building a relationship on the foundation of respect. And the first thing that I want to say to you is this, is that you have to have respect for yourself. You must have respect for yourself. And so, again, Joseph said, he looked at her, he says, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. He trusts me with everything in his entire household. So, one of the questions would be, how did Joseph, a slave, that's what Joseph was. He was a prisoner. He was a slave in the house of Potiphar. How did he earn that kind of trust that Potiphar would trust him, this slave boy, with everything? He says he put everything in Joseph's hand except for what he was eating. And when you look at that, I think you have to go back a couple of verses in order to see exactly how Joseph became so trusted. So I just want to read that to you, going back to Genesis chapter 39, looking at verses 2 through 6. It says, the Lord was with Joseph, and so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything that he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything that he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All of his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and his livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything that he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about anything except the food, what kind of food to eat. And so when you look at this, you see that Joseph had earned the trust of his boss because even in difficult circumstances, and this was a difficult circumstance, Joseph was far away from home. Joseph was a slave, falsely accused. He is now a slave in a foreign land. And even in the middle of those difficult circumstances, Joseph still chose to live according to the standards that he believed to be true. And that's one of the first things I want to say here to you, is that this idea of learning how to respect yourself, you have to have some standards. You have to have a standards that you choose to live by. And those standards can't change based upon your circumstances. What is true is true. And what you believe in, you believe in. You can't change them based upon what people around you say, how you feel at the moment. But what do you believe is true? And Joseph chose to live by those standards. And because Joseph chose to live by those standards, God honored Joseph. And Joseph's life was blessed, and the people around Joseph was blessed, and his work was blessed, and his relationships were blessed because Joseph chose to honor God. And so this says a lot about Joseph's character, about the type of person Joseph was. I like to say that Joseph had a life code. He had a life code that governed how he carried himself, and he was not willing to violate that. So here's the thing that I want you to understand, this first principle of learning to respect yourself. If you want to build healthy relationships on a foundation of respect, it starts with you learning how to respect yourself. You see, you set the tone for how, what's important to know is that you set the tone for how you are going to be treated within a relationship. You set that tone. Here's an important truth that I want you to understand and to live by. And that it is no one will respect boundaries that you don't set. No one will respect boundaries that you have not set. They can't respect boundaries that you have not set. And that's what I see a lot of times. We want people to respect us. But the question is, are you living in a way that demands respect? Are you living in a way that commands respect? Do you live in such a way that people say, wait a minute, I can't say that around her, or I can't treat her this way, or I can't do this to her because she won't stand for it. I can't treat him this way because this violates the principles that he lives by, and he never goes against those standards. This is critical, you all. You cannot, no one will respect boundaries that you don't set. And so I want you to own that. I want you to understand that, live into that. Because if you don't respect yourself, how can you expect anybody else to respect you? And so you have to determine, you have to communicate, and you have to stick with your value system. I remember years ago, several years ago, when I first wrote the book, How Far Can You Go? Straight Talk About Sexual Purity. A young lady came to me and she read the manuscript. Matter of fact, it wasn't even a full manuscript. It was just the outline of the book. and it was a partially written manuscript. She came back to me and she said that she and her boyfriend, actually it was her fiance at the time, ended up reading the book together. She said she learned a lot. She's a college student. She says, but she had never heard anybody talk about the boundaries that she was supposed to set in terms of her physical relationship with her boyfriend. So she said after she read the book and the manuscript, they went back and they set up boundaries in terms of how they were going to respond within the context of their dating relationship. A few months later, I saw her and she told me that the marriage and the wedding had been called off. And I thought that was it. I said, well, why? What happened? She said he could not stay within the boundaries. He kept violating the boundaries that we set. She says, and so my belief was that if he cannot maintain boundaries when he's courting me, he will not maintain boundaries when we're within the marriage relationship. And she ended up calling off the wedding. I found that to be very admirable in terms of her willingness to live within her standards and to hold her fiance to those standards and to not give in. That's what I'm talking about when I say respect yourself. Again, you have to determine your standards. You have to communicate those standards, and then you have to be willing to stick with those standards, even if it means costing you something. So that's the first principle that I want to communicate to you. You have to respect yourself. You have to, and here's the second one. You have to respect others. You have to respect others. Okay? You know what? I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of, okay, I think I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. But I didn't. But here, I want you to understand you need to be able to respect others. Now, in the scripture, again, I want to use that same scripture. It says, Joseph says, my master trusts me, and he trusts me with everything within his house. You see, respect for self and respect for others is intertwined. It's almost inextricably intertwined. When Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment? He says, you need to love others, and you need to love others the way you love yourself. So you see this connection with how I see myself, how I respond to myself, what I think about myself, and what I think about others. Those things are very closely related. And so a person who has low standards or no standards for how they think about themselves, how they act toward themselves, will also have low standards or no standards for how they think and act towards you. So when you meet a person who has no standards, then don't expect them to also all of a sudden get some because they're in a relationship with you. I have something written on the mirror in my office. I mean, in my bathroom. I was listening to a podcast or a sermon. I'm not sure what it was, and I was in my bathroom and I had a marker and someone said something, and I wrote it on the mirror in dry erase because I wanted to remember it. And it said that emotional relationships are no place for evangelism. Emotional relationships are no place for evangelism. Other words, if you are there is no such thing as missionary dating. I don't believe in missionary dating. You don't get into a relationship saying you're going to fix somebody. You're going to make them better. You know what? Who you are is who you are. People get better because they want to get better, not because you have the capacity to fix them. And so if you have a person who has no character, and they have shown you that they have no character, they have shown you that they are not a person who respects you or other people, if they have shown you that, then you need to believe that, and you need to be careful about getting involved in relationships with people like that because they will bring you down. You see, Joseph had earned the respect of Potiphar, and he was not willing to do anything to disrespect him because he respected his boss. And I want you to understand that healthy relationships are built on a foundation of mutual respect. If one of the partners in the relationship is constantly failing to recognize and honor the value of the other person, then that relationship is not healthy. That is not a healthy relationship where you feel like you cannot be yourself, where you feel like you're constantly being put down in order to make somebody else feel good about themselves. That's not a healthy relationship. In fact, that's a toxic relationship. And so one of the things that I wanted to share as I thought about that, I wanted to talk about a little bit about what are some signs of a toxic relationship. I looked at that, and so I found this article, and I'm going to give you the link here in just a few minutes, but I want to share with you about 12, and I'm not going to go into them in detail, but I just want to read some things to you, and I'm going to put these things right here in our on our Facebook and on YouTube. I'm going to be putting up a slide that talks about what are some of the signs of a toxic relationship. So let's just look at these real quick as we're talking about learning how to respect other people. If you are in a situation where the person is all take, no give, where that person is constantly withdrawing emotionally from you, but they're not giving anything back, let me tell you, that is probably the sign of a toxic relationship. If you are in that relationship and you are constantly feeling drained emotionally, you're not happy, you're not productive, you're just kind of physically, emotionally, spiritually tired, you need to be reevaluating that relationship. If there is a lack of trust within that relationship, you are probably in a toxic relationship. If the atmosphere is hostile, if there's always anger, there's always this sense of doom in this relationship, you're probably in a toxic relationship. If it's occupied with imbalance, it seems like the relationship was one-sided. If there is constant judgment, where you constantly feel like you're on trial, the person is nitpicking everything about you, you're probably in a toxic relationship. If there is this persistent unreliability, where you just cannot depend upon that person, anything they say, anything they tell you, they're not reliable. If you see, excuse me, nonstop narcissism, the person is only interested in how they look within the relationship. If there's a lack of communication, if there's continuous disrespect, if there is mutual avoidance, if you are trying not to see each other, if you constantly blocking their calls or saying, I got something to do, there's a good possibility that you're in a toxic relationship. So I just gave you 10 things there. Here's the link. I pulled those from this article, 35 signs that you're in a toxic relationship. I just posted that on YouTube. It's at the bottom of the slide. You can see the link to that if you want to go and read that some more. So be careful when you think about, again, building strong relationships. It is really important that you are in, excuse me, a healthy, emotionally healthy relationship. Okay, what's the third principle for building building on a foundation of respect? And the third principle is that you not only need to have respect for yourself and respect for the other person, there also needs to be a respect for marriage. I want you to notice what Joseph said here. He says, no one has more authority than I do. And he says, he, talking about Mr. Potiphar, has held nothing back from me. He has held nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. Because you are his wife. And so here's this thing that's significant. Even though Miss Potiphar was willing to ignore her marriage vows for a fling in the hay with Joseph, Joseph said, I understand that, but even if you don't respect yourself, I am going to respect you. But not only am I going to respect you, I'm going to respect myself, I'm going to respect your husband, and I'm going to respect you. There is also something significant here. He said, I will respect the sanctity of your marriage. The Bible talks about how the marriage bed is undefiled, is sacred. This is a really important thing. And we need to understand this. We need to hold on to this. This reminds me of several years ago several years ago. I think when I say several, I mean like 30, because I remember I had just gotten married, and this woman came up to me and she asked me if I was married. And I says, yes, I'm married. But then she came back and she says, are you happily married? And I was like, wow, that's just an amazing. I thought that was something I would see on TV. In other words, it didn't matter to her that I was married. She thought, if you're not happy, then we can have a relationship, or we can have something. You see, she had no respect for the sanctity of marriage. She had no respect for my vows, and she was willing to violate that. And so just because you're married, or just because someone else is married, does not mean that there won't be an opportunity for you to step out of that marriage. Doesn't mean that the temptations won't be there for you to step outside of that. But you have to respect marriage. And Joseph respected himself. He respected his boss. He respected Mrs. Potiphar. But he also respected, the institution of marriage. Marriage is so important. I'm going to spend probably about 3 sessions talking about marriage, very specifically, as we look at what was God's intention for the marriage relationship. But there's just a couple of things that I want to say here tonight as we're getting close to the end of our time. There's just a couple of points that I want to make here tonight in the context of repairing broken romantic relationships. Here's the reality. The divorce rate is down among millennials as compared to the generations before, the boomer generation. The divorce rate is down about 18%. So millennials are getting divorced at a rate much lower than their parents and maybe, I'm not even going to say their grandparents, but especially their parents. And I think this reflects a couple of things. I think, one, it reflects a trend that millennials are waiting longer to get married. And maybe that means that they're going to be better prepared to be married because they're a little bit older and more mature. So that's one thing. But I think it also reflects the fact that younger people are choosing to forego marriage, not just delaying it, but they're choosing to actually forego marriage. And they're moving in together. So there's this issue of cohabitation, of living together. I have done very few weddings of late where the couples have not been living together. And so the reality is that between 2007, 2016, the rate of cohabitation rose 29%. That's quite a bit. And about 50% of those people living together are under the age of 35. And so there's a variety of reasons for this. Some people are choosing to focus up on their careers, focus up on education, focus up on their personal needs. They want to travel. They have some goals. They want to be more financially stable before they get married. All of those are things. But I think that there is another factor that is probably having just as much of an impact. And that factor is the growing skepticism towards marriage. I am constantly hearing young people say to me, I don't want to get married. I have no plans of getting married. And a lot of reasons that they don't want to get married is that they don't want a mistake. They said they're afraid of making the same mistakes that they saw their parents make. They're afraid of putting their children through some of the pain that they went through as they went through divorce. And so a lot of people are just pulling back and afraid of getting married and having no intention of getting involved in that relationship. And I fully understand that. I get wanting to avoid the pain. I get wanting to struggling with seeing parents go through divorce and all of the ugliness of that and saying, I don't want that. I fully understand that. And even though it breaks my heart to hear it, I do get it. But this is one of the things that I often say to the young people who I hear say that. I tell them, I say, don't allow your fear of failure, your fear of painful experiences, or the lack of good role models cause you to disrespect or to ignore Okay, yeah. So don't allow the fear of failure, of painful experiences, or the lack of good role models cause you to disrespect, ignore, alter, or abuse the sacred institution of marriage. Marriage can be a beautiful thing. It's hard. It's hard as all get out, but it can be a beautiful thing. And again, we're going to talk about that in detail next week. But I want you to understand that that God has a plan for marriage, and we still need to respect that plan. And so again, as my time is about out, I just want to real quickly hit one more aspect of this idea of respect. One more piece that we need to respect, and that is that you need to learn how, if you're going to have a healthy relationship, you also need to respect God. What Joseph said was, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? You see, Joseph recognized that what he was being asked to do violated the principles that he lived by, but he lived by principles based upon who God is, the Word of God, and how God wants him to live. And he said, if I do this, I am going to violate my relationship with God, and I love God too much in order to do that. So it's important. Last week we talked about this idea that you have to that how do we repair our broken relationships? And I talked about our priorities. And so one of the things that you're going to need to do if you are in a romantic relationship, and I said this last week, and I want to end, I ended last week by saying this, and I want to end tonight by saying the same thing, is that we have to reorder our love priorities. We have to reorder our love priorities. I talked about 3 different types of love, of eros, of the physical, that sexual love, or the love based upon physical attraction, and phileo, the friendship, and agape, that unconditional love that God has for us and he expects us to have for other people. And we need to reorder that. Miss Go Too Far focused upon eros, and she focused upon, I can't even say she focused on phileo, on friendship. We don't see that, but she definitely did not have agape. But that was the order that she went after love in. She started with eros and went from there. And I believe that in our romantic relationships, if you're going to have healthy relationships, you need to reverse that order. You need to switch that order. And we need to focus up on agape first. That unconditional love, that commitment to do whatever is best for the person with whom you are in relationship. Understand that you have to put God first, because he's bigger than your emotions. He's bigger than your feelings. He's bigger than your ideologies. He's bigger than all of that. That must be the true foundation of your relationship. That has to be the anchor. That has to be the deciding vote in disputes. That has to be the foundational one on which everything else is built. This agape, this willingness to say, I will do whatever is necessary in order to help you be the person that God created you to be. And I will do nothing that will violate that, nothing that will push you away from that, but I will do everything I can to pull you into a proper relationship with God. Then on top of that, then you go and you build that friendship. I like to say that committed friendship, the unconditional love, and then the committed friendship where you are doing everything you can to be the best type of friend you can be to that person. Then after you have only after you have entered into the marriage covenant, should you move into that third type of love, that eros type of love, which is what I call the covenantal consummation. The covenantal consummation, in the sense that the glue that makes this marriage work, that keeps this couple together, where you are saying, I am committed to you until death do us part. Not as long as we both shall love, but as long as we both shall live. So God has, listen, you all, God has a plan for creating healthy relationships. But his plan only works if we're willing to follow it. We can't blame God if we fail to follow his instructions. I think of, a lot of us put things together, and we have furniture that we put together, or we have a car that we drive, but how many of us just jump right in and try to do it on our own, and then after we blow it, then we go back and read the instructions? Listen, God says you need to read the instructions. The Word of God is an instruction book for life. It's the instruction book for our relationships. And if you want to have healthy relationships, go to the one who created those relationships. That's what God is about. That's what he wants us to do. When we respect God by following his recipe for relationships, we transform them from awful to awesome when we follow his directions. But when we don't, we know we can pretty much guarantee that we're going to mess things up when we fail to follow God's relationships the way he wants us to live. So that brings me to the end. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here on Real Life Matters. Again, if you like us, like what you're hearing, I'm going to ask that you would please share. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us up on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Jason Perry C3. We want to let you know that we appreciate all of the hits, all of the responses, all of the comments that you put, any likes you give us. If you like what we're doing, please like us on Facebook, like us on this page right now, and we really appreciate it. I'm also going to ask that you would please share this video with somebody who you think it may be a benefit to. Next week, we are going to move into looking at another relationship in terms of how do we repair broken relationships. And next week, we're going to look at repairing the broken marriage relationship. And I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this. I'm going to be sharing some things that we have been teaching for the last several years about God's plan for the marriage relationship. And I don't care whether you're married or single. You need to stop. You need to take the time to hear this. Call your friends, call your enemies, call anybody. Ask them to please make the plans to tune into this. I believe the things that we're going to share next week in talking about marriage relationships will be transformational for you. It'll help your marriage, and it'll help you just in your relationships with other people. So again, thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with us. We appreciate it. God bless you, and I look forward to reading your comments and talking with you next week. God bless.